So in this video, we're actually going to build something, kind of show you really what the workflow looks like in practice. In that other video, I was just kind of moving stuff around on the scene. So this is actually taking some of those edit tools and really looking at how we make something with it. The most important thing I think in the beginning is using reference and really observing different objects and see what shapes they're kind of used to kind of be put together. If you have stuff around your room, I think this is great because they tend to be a little bit more, you know, have a little more personality to it and stuff that you're more excited about working with, anyways. That's not always the case. Sometimes you kind of want to look at references for a specific scene that you're trying to build, and that's okay too. Um, you can also look at ArtStation for just different stylistic choices. But in the beginning, I would just focus on just like representation and try to like replicate as much as you can. And then after you kind of get a foundation of these tools, is kind of then expand and kind of make stuff more stylized, and kind of tweak stuff out more. Um, you could just do like a Google search, which is fine, but often these tend to be like too much of a product, too pristine. I typically like one of my favorite sites is eBay, because stuff tends to be a little bit more used and have a little more personality, more interesting to look at. Stuff that's, has some scuff marks, or scratches at it. And even just this wire being a little bit more loosely like laid out, maybe even like a rubber band or a piece of tape, is kind of holding it on. And again, I think it just makes for a more interesting object than something that's, too perfect. Um, so go ahead and create a new scene. And then I'm going to go to my modeling because that's what I'm focused on. And then there's different ways you can add a reference. Like again, if you're working on something in your, room, I think that's great. You can always snap a photo of it just in case something happens to it or if you need to take it on the road. Um, you can also put it like in a window up here, and you can add another window by simply just like dragging this down. And then you create another window here, and you can put a reference in here, by kind of changing that out. But again, that's kind of small, and you don't necessarily need to do that. If you want to erase a window, you simply drag on that and then kind of drag it towards another one. Um, but I think the easiest way is to just add it to our scene. So if I'll go to add, image, reference image, and then go ahead and grab your reference image and pull it up. And it'll add it at whatever angle we have our viewport at. So if that was kind of at an angle, I would just select this X and go to add, and then I can go to image, reference, do that again. Now it's perfectly, flush with this, um, my axis. And we'll take a look at more of like, we might want this to line up, when we're building something a little more mechanical or that we're kind of wanting, a little more detailed. Sometimes you want like a front view or a top view and these all to kind of line up where you need them to be. And that just comes down to like personal preference. And, really think about, okay, what can I make, what simple shapes can I use as a starting point? And as you kind of progress more, you'll kind of start, learning more about what makes the most sense to you. Boxes are great, I think, in the beginning, to start off with. But for this purpose, let's try doing a cylinder. And I'll go to add cylinder. And there are some other tools that, modifiers that might make this process a little bit quicker. But I really want to focus on just our edit tools and see how far we can kind of get with that, um, before kind of looking at some of those other tools next week. So then I can go ahead and size this up. That looks roughly okay. And then I'm going to go to edit mode. Then you notice when I'm in edit mode, my origin point, still stays at that point. If this is an object mode, it would move. And then I'm looking at, okay, this top part is flat. It kind of has this little bit of an angle here. I think even flatter than that. And that looks good to me. So I'll go ahead and extrude this out and then see it's going off in this, not the axis I want. I actually want it on my Y axis. So I just press Y and then it can go ahead and flatten out from there. And then I'm going to scale this edge down. And then I will simply type in 0. So it is nice and flat. That looks pretty decent. Um, I'm going to delete these faces in here because I'm going to make a copy of this and I want to connect them in the center. Um, so it's one solid object. So go ahead and press X or delete, and I'm just going to delete the faces. And you see this is just an open face thing, so I can kind of connect two of these together. And I'm going to keep an edit mode because I want it to be the same object. And then I'm going to simply go to mesh and duplicate. And that is also, you could do that with just our hotkey with the Shift D if you want. And it kind of brings this around. And if I want to lock that in, I'll press Y. And then let's go ahead and flip this around. I can rotate this, and then to make it exact, I'll just make sure I type this in at 180. So now this is looking pretty close to that shape. I'll kind of eyeball these, maybe a little on the wide side. So I will hold down Alt, just and then Shift to select both these edge loops. So if I hold down Alt select, I can select one edge loop. I hold down Shift and Alt allow me to select another one. Then I'm going to scale these up away from each other. So I don't think the controller is quite that wide. So then that looks pretty good to me. And then there's different ways I can select this whole base in here. And we haven't looked too much at these other um, viewpoints. And we'll look at more at like the viewport shading. We're looking at materials and this wireframe as well. And wireframe could be nice, but sometimes it could be almost too much information, but it kind of adds some transparency to it. You can also do a mixture of both, which is kind of like this ghosted look, which allows you to see the other faces. So if I were to go to select mode, and I can either just draw a box around it, and then I can allow me to select all of those. And then I can move this a little bit closer so these all touch and connect. Now, there's a couple things we can look at. We can join these in different ways. We can join these manually, and I'll look at that way. Another way we could do it is if you look over here, it's like auto merge vertices, and you could set, how close that is. But I feel like for starting out, whatever the general setting is just fine. So as these vertices get closer together, they automatically join each other, which is what we want. Now, if I want to do these manually, I can just hold down one vertice, hold down another one, and then I can go to vertex, and then I could it's actually in mesh, which is kind of confusing. And then you can go to merge. You can either do at center, at the first one, at the last one. So if I do at center, it'll connect them between the two like that. So now it's these two vertices are connected. Or I can kind of go back and do the auto merge, which if I'm doing a bunch, it's kind of convenient. The only thing is sometimes you don't always want that. So I would only turn it on when you need it. And then same thing with this view. Sometimes that can be confusing as well. Looks pretty close for now for this tutorial, which is great. Um, let's look at adding, if you notice around this little circle in here, I like how it kind of extrudes in a little bit. If I click on this face, and then if I extrude or inset, let's do inset first. I'll bring that in about, that looks decent. And then I'll use my extrude. I'll bring that down a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the left side, but it's a little bit smaller. So I'll go to inset and then I'll bring that in quite a bit smaller. And that looks decent to me. And then we can go ahead and drop that roughly about the same. And this is stuff that you might even do like with texturing, but for now we're just focused on again just our modeling and not relying on textures. Let's look at maybe even adding some buttons. And I'll add, so there's a couple things with these buttons. If you notice, there's almost like a similar shape that's kind of coming up from them that we could add. So I'll add, this time I want it to be separate. So I'll add, I want it to be separate. So I'll go back to object mode and then I'll go to mesh. I'll add a cylinder and then I will shrink this down. And then I will make this a little bit wider. Let's, yeah, let's make it a little bit. And you know what? I'm gonna go back. What I want to do is I'm going to add like one more. I think it'll make a huge difference. So let's see. I'm just adding a couple more sections in there, segments in there. I really don't think it'll make that big of a difference, but let's see. And then I'm going to go back to edit mode. And then another great selection technique is if I wanted to select like a row of something, if I hold down my control and I click in a direction, it'll select that whole section rather than having to like manually select all of these, which is nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and stretch this out. So it's roughly about the same. Let's see. That looks close enough for me. And then I'm going to go back to object mode and scale this down. And then I'm going to add another cylinder for one of the buttons. Then move this over. We'll scale this down too. And again, if you hover over these, they'll tell you what the hotkeys are. If you're kind of wanting to learn them, um, you can go ahead and hover over them. So go ahead and move this over. And then again, we'll scale this up. And then, so it's roughly, I think I will add a bevel to it too. And then I'm kind of happy with this shape. Let's go to Object, Shade Auto Smooth. And then let's go ahead and add our bevel. Again, we can select just the face of this, and I think this will let us just bevel that. Sometimes it'll not bevel as much as you want. If you notice that it's not really that even. And what's causing this is if I go to that, it has these transforms, like as a z-axis, and we want to clear out these transforms. So if you go to Object, Apply All Transforms, this will typically zero that out. So then these are all applied and this sets it back to zero. So if your mesh is ever doing something kind of weird like that, you're not understanding quite why. That's typically the reason. But you notice when you do that, it sets the origin point back to there. So I'm going to set the origin to geometry. And now when I go to bevel, it's more even. And it doesn't need to be that much, probably. And then I could probably get by with just the two segments. That looks decent for me. Think about like how big is this object really going to be um, in comparison to like, how much detail you actually need it for. So I'm going to duplicate this. So if I go to object, duplicate objects, and then again, if I just press the X, it'll move it over to where I need it along the X axis. That looks decent. Let's go ahead and shade this auto smooth too. I could probably add a bevel to that. And I'm doing it because I think I'm essentially done for what I need it to be. And let's take a look at again, like I think look, this one's so tweaked out that the bevel really isn't doing anything. Um, it's just doing almost like an inset. But again, if you look at the transform here, um, it's really not um like the scale and all that, it throws it off. So if I go to object, again, this is an object mode. Notice that too, like I'm kind of jumping back and forth between the modes. And there's certain things in object mode that you can access that you can't, like the shade smooth and all that. So I'm gonna go to apply, all transforms, and then I'm gonna go geometry. Oh, I'm gonna go to origin back to geometry. And you could flip flop either one. Um, and then now in my bevel mode, it'll do this nice even bevel. So that looks decent enough. And then I could go ahead and move these over. If you want, you can always, parent um, these to like this object. And it's not always something you want to do because it can get kind of confusing, but it does make moving stuff around a little bit easier. So over here, let's rename this. Um, so I'll name this one button one, and we'll name this one button two. And then we'll call this button groups one. So now if I drag, there's different ways you can parent stuff. If I drag this over here, it says hold down shift to parent. So I hold down shift, I'll parent these buttons. I drag it over to this button group. So now I can move this around as a group, but then I could still select these buttons and move them individually. You can always unparent them if it's getting annoying, but it still allows me, it's not like these are joined. So I could still um, move these around without, if I need to, as separate objects. So that looks pretty decent. Now I just need to rotate it and shrink it down. So let's scale this whole thing down. And so you can do that. You can hold down, again, if you hold down near the center of it, it'll allow you to scale it uniformly. And that looks kind of decent. I think I should make these a little bit longer, but for this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it. And that angle looks okay to me. Let's see, what would negative 45 look like? I feel like do some even math just to keep it cleaner. And then let's drop that down. and put it there. If I wanted to, like, I could probably go through and delete some of this geometry that's not showing. Um, so I'm just selecting these faces. I'm just going to object mode, edit mode, so I can select the faces. And then what I would really want to do is go through and actually make these shapes line up and connect to this overall mesh. But we'll look at more of those type of techniques in our next project. For now, I just kind of want you to get just a little bit more familiar with the basic tools moving stuff around. But really like to have this as one like clean mesh where like all these line up and connect would be better practice. So then I'm going to duplicate this object. And then let's just keep it on one axis to make it easier to move. What about there? And then I can always move it. Oh, did not like that. All right, let's see if I can do. So I got to make sure I'm selecting everything, and then I'll go to object, duplicate, and then I can kind of set this up in a way that, again, by kind of controlling which axes I pull on, so it's still on the same Z axis, and that looks pretty decent to me on that part. And then we can work on creating the other buttons. So let's go and create and add a mesh. And we'll add a cube this time. And we will shrink this down. You can also just press S if you are wanting to learn the hotkeys and scale that down. Or you can just use the scale tool, scale it down where you need it to be. And then let's go ahead and put this down a little bit. And then you can select these and go, and you can, go ahead and extrude these, the same. And then you can control how far they go out would be one way of doing it. So I'm like, well, I want these all to go out, let's say 0.3 meters. And then you could do around the same thing, 0.3 meters. And then these will all be even. It's kind of the one way of doing it. You should also be able to, another way you might want to do it is if you select all of these, up here at the top, you have different pivot points. So this is, you're pivoting around like a global axis. These are also like the transform pivots as well, which is helpful if you want to go around individual origins. And if you notice over here on our extrude, you can also extrude individuals too. So if you notice that some of these tools, they have like um, an arrow. So if I go to, instead of just extrude region, if I want to extrude to cursor, can be helpful. But I'm going to do extrude to individuals. So now it'll actually do it all at the same time, which is really convenient. And kind of pushing this out a little bit further. Then you can increase the offset so it looks more like the joypad that you want. Still 0.8. And that looks good enough. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and line this up. I'll press S to scale it down. And I guess I use S when I'm wanting to like scale it uniformly. And say like, okay, if I wanted to bring this to this center, of this circle. And like, I'm like, well, it's close enough. That's okay. But say I want to make life a little bit easier, or I'm, really maybe I'm doing some kind of like industrial design project where I'm having to like 3D print this. So what I can do is I can um, move, I can select this edge loop in here, and then I could set, if I do Shift S again, I can do cursor to selected, and it'll move this cursor right to the center of this circle that I selected. Then now, if I select my shape, I can go to um, object. I can set my origin to 3D cursor. So you'll watch this, my little yellow origin here will drop down to that 3D cursor. And then I will set my geometry to my origin. So now it centers it where I need it to go. And again, that's kind of a way that this origin again can kind of come in handy, or this cursor can come in handy to kind of help you line stuff up. So then there's that. Again, I could go through and add some bevels to this. In our next project, we'll look at, how to do stuff like doing like these like cutouts. And there's different ways you could do that as well. We can look at a couple ways. I might leave it for now, but really, so I'm going to bring that down. Maybe I'll do it after, but I kind of notice how this thumb pad is kind of like recessed in the center there. But I guess, yeah, might as well. Let's look at how one way of doing this. And you could do a knife cut, but it might be kind of hard to have it line up how you want it to be. So I'm going to do an inset on this face, and then I'm going to um, shrink this down. And it kind of bends this rule of quads a little bit, where it'll, I'm still using quads, but I'm making a triangle, right? Like I'm using this, and this allows me to like, line stuff up, and then I can, keep these values all the way around. You can also do like mirror editing, and sometimes that'll help if you're kind of working on like mesh symmetry. But again, we'll look at more of these advanced type stuff. I don't want to throw too many tools at you in the beginning, but just kind of keep it, see how far you can get with these tools first. Then we'll slowly add more as we kind of progress in this course. So now I have this little triangle shape. Maybe I'll go a little bit smaller. And then I will go extrude down. And then you can select this and it's the same thing. And if you want, you could do something similar in here. I know it's not a circle, but there's another way you can do that as well. And it's not the best, but let's take a look at using these tools that we know. If I want to turn this into a circle, one way I could do that is to select these edges here. And then I can go through and I can bevel those out. And you can keep doing that if you want. But the tricky part is, again, then I'm starting to add stuff that isn't necessarily the best geometry, but that's okay. I think for this tutorial, this is just one way of kind of adding some of these a little bit more interesting details into our controller. And then the same thing, I'll probably like select all these and make, these beveled. Or I could even, let's see, select all those and then bevel those out. So everything is kind of roughly the same distance. And then I'll go to my object, shade auto smooth. Maybe not. Let's see. Maybe I want to add one more segment in there. Or maybe I should apply my transform. So I go to object, apply transform. And then I would go to object, set origin to geometry. Oop. Or the other way around. And then how I could, now if I go back to my bevel, everything's more even. And then I can try to do that. Let's see what shade auto smooth. Sometimes shade smooth looks a little bit better depending on, but you notice when we start adding some of these triangles in here, it could start messing with the shading. And that's again kind of thinking about trying to keep everything quads. Otherwise, it'll start kind of getting a little bit wonky with the shading. All right, so that looks decent. And then let's add some more interesting parts to this controller. If you notice, like this is actually two pieces of plastic. So there's this little, it's hard to see in this angle, but there's this little ridge that kind of goes around there. So I'm going to do that by adding a loop cut. Now you can go ahead and click here. If you hover over here, you could do Control R, which I tend to do. And then over here, it says number of cuts. So let's do, if we did two, it'll kind of bring these together, which is more what we want, because then I'm going to extrude this in, which kind of seems like a reverse, extrude, but that's okay. So I'm going to do it like that. And then I'm going to select these faces, again, by holding down Alt and allow me to select all that. And then if I do extrude, but I just want to do extrude region, I can kind of bring that in a little bit. Oh, I can do extrude region. Let's do, let's try, I'll press E for extrude, and then I'll press S for scale. And then that'll kind of allow me to bring that in and kind of do it like so it extrudes evenly on all the sides like that. So that looks pretty decent for that part of the controller. And then I can go through and add bevels to everything too. So let's do object. Let's go to apply all our transforms. And then we'll go back to edit and try to select all. And then let's see if we can bevel these just so it looks. Oh, I don't like that it selected those inner rings. So let's just do our own selection. So again, you notice I do a lot of undos. I do a lot of like Control Z if that doesn't work out. Another thing you can do is save multiple copies. Um, and I highly recommend doing that as a technique too, is like you're kind of going along. Like, well, actually that bevel isn't as much, so maybe I'll do it separately. So Control Z, Control Z. So then I can do this bevel a little bit bigger. And I'll do this bottom one too. I'm holding down Shift Select, Alt Shift Select. So Alt is what's kind of grabbing these edge loops. And then Shift is holding down Shift and selecting is allowing me to select more of these edges. And then I can go through and kind of do this bevel. And yeah, what I would do is like save it in multiple sections. You can also make copies of an object. If you're like, well, I want to try a different technique, but I don't really want to mess, if I do something I don't like. Again, you can save another file. You go save as, um, this could be controller two. Um, and save multiple ones and kind of keep in mind which ones you're working on. You can also within your file, so this would be controller one, you can, drag some of the stuff out. I don't want to select that light. And you could duplicate it. Let's move it over to my y-axis. And then you have like an actual copy that you can kind of modify and not have to worry about if you did something that like, well, that didn't work out. I did all these, stuff. You do have, you can go through if you do edit, you do have an undo history, which is nice. And you can kind of set up, how many of these undos you have. But like you do too many, it's going to start eating, bogging down your memory and stuff like that, which is, um, so it's kind of a balance there. I think it's better to kind of just, or more efficient just to make a copy of something or make a copy of the file. So there's that. Um, and then you can go through if you're like, well, let's add those top buttons as well. And there's different ways you could do that. Um, I might even do it. Let's say this is where those undos and like copies kind of come into play. Because I might do before I do that cut. Let's see if I can go all the way back there. That would be good. No, it's okay. Because I want to pull this shape before I did this cut, but I didn't see I ran out of undo, so I can't do that. So let's go to repeat because I don't really. Oh, so what I can do, let's go back to doing this bevel. And what I'll do is I'll make a copy. And you'll see what I'm talking about here in a second. Wow, this is a little bit, I should have done reversed, but if I have this, I can, I have these faces selected. I can go to mesh and then I can go to um, duplicate just this face. So I have those faces selected, and then I can pull that out. And then I can use this because that button, that top button does have kind of a curve to it. And this might be a little too exaggerated, but that's okay. And then I can make it a little bit taller. So it kind of fits. And then I can even extrude this out. So it kind of fits that better shape. I just press E that time for the extrude hotkey. And then that looks pretty close. I could probably even, let's see, this will actually, let's try doing Control R for an edge loop. And then I will, I wonder, I could do that, or let's try doing a bevel maybe. I'm trying to see, like, make where this is kind of rounded here at the top. And like I can either throw in an edge loop here and shrink this down, or I can do a bevel on each side here and kind of round them out that way, which might be a quicker way of doing it. And I think the top is probably the same. I think this button's a little too long, but I'm just gonna roll with it. And that's okay. And then I'm going to, let's do this other side. Same thing. And you can kind of see it's like you start getting more, I mean, you just kind of build off this basic shape and you can get more and more detail as you kind of progress forward. Let's go a little bit bigger. And then if I really wanted to make this, let's select this thing. You can also do if I select just this face, and I can do select, you can do select linked. You can select similar by trait, which kind of makes it helpful um, when you're trying to select certain things. You can also do select loops. Linked means like these are all linked together, connected. You can link stuff manually, or if it's just one object or it's separate, it's going to select this separate thing, even though I'm in edit mode. Um, it allows me to do that. And then if I wanted to, what I should do until I'm ready to join this is I should go to mesh, separate selection. So now this is separate, and I can move this up and down. Go to object, set origin, origin geometry, and kind of go through. And then kind of like how I do with the buttons, I can just put this, along like that. And I think for this, this point of your modeling, I think this would be fine. We're not, making stuff, not worried about making stuff game ready just yet. But something like that would work fine. If you want to make this a little bit, what you should do, what I would do is I would go through and I would add um, either cut, I could cut this out um, by going and in setting these in. I could also add a couple edge loops. So now I have roughly like this same thickness. And I'm just shift selecting, control select, shift select, control select. So I'm selecting this row, control select, shift, control, and then I can go through, undo, it's too much. And then I can press X or to delete those faces. And then I can go through and round those out as well. Um, and move this back and kind of put that in. So it's actually, more like the plastic faces. But again, for this, for the beginning, I wouldn't stress too much about that. Um, we'll look at more, we'll get more into the weeds with that type of stuff in our next tutorial. But for now, I just want you to just keep things simple. Keep it again for all intents and purposes, that should be fine just for now. And then, again, I'll go through and I'll bevel these edges. And then let's do bevel. It kind of rounds it out. And then I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I know I got to do the other side. And there's some other details I got to add to it. I got to add these buttons in here. But really, I'll leave it up to you. Like, I don't want you necessarily copying, like this retro controller. I want you creating stuff that, you want to create. And the more stuff you build, that's the kind of point of this first exercise is I want you to go through and build about 6 different objects that will kind of tell a story, that they kind of work together and kind of work up to something like um, start setting up a scene. We're not doing like a whole environment one yet. It's kind of like a micro version of that. And really think about like, you know, how these objects work together to tell a story, or how do these objects kind of play um, as individual objects to really like, again, kind of looking back at, um, some like I think adding certain details here and there is kind of expands upon like, gives this thing a little bit more personality than it would if I like maybe picked like a newer Xbox controller, or maybe even didn't have some of these cutouts or stuff like that. So really think about what you're creating, how you're creating them, how they relate to other objects too. Um, and yeah, that's it for this one.